Hello, can everyone hear me? Give me a quick yes in the chat box. I'd appreciate it. Oh, good. Okay. Sorry for that slight technical difficulty at the beginning, but welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Laura Hall. I am the chair for the Webinar Wednesdays, which are hosted by the Professional Development Committee of TACAC, the Texas Association for College Admission Counseling. We are so glad that you all are. This is the second webinar in our series, and we are going to be talking about making a play in the NCAA. With us, we have Jessica Hamm, who was named Assistant Director of Compliance and Governance for the Big 12 Conference in August of 2015. She assists with the conference's compliance and governance programs and services, including serving as the primary contact for Level 3 and Level 4 violations reporting. She also provides rules interpretations of NCAA and Big 12 conference rules and serves as the primary administrator of the conference administrated waiver process. Prior to joining the Big 12, Jessica served as the Assistant Director of Compliance at Baylor University from May 2013 to August 2015, and has served in intern roles at the Big 12 and the University of Oklahoma Athletics Compliance Office. Jessica earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Oklahoma College of Law in May 2013 and was admitted to the Texas Bar Association in November of 2013. She graduated summa cum laude from Oklahoma State University in May 2010 with a Bachelor's of Science in Sports Public Relations and Public Relations with a minor in Marketing. So we are very excited that Jessica has joined us today and that she will be sharing her knowledge of how we can better advise our students who want to play sports at the collegiate level. A few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Jessica. I'll be monitoring the chat if you have questions as we go through the presentation, and there will be some time at the end for questions as well. So with that, I am going to figure out how to mute myself and turn the program over to Jessica.
Thanks, Laura. Can everyone hear me? If you can type yes in the chat box, that would be great. Awesome. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. As you can see, today's webinar will be focused on advising students who want to play sports at the collegiate level, and specifically what needs to be communicated to those students in regards to NCAA initial eligibility. So today we're going to go through a couple things, just a brief background on the NCAA. We're going to go through the NCAA's initial eligibility academic requirements, high school counselors' role in the NCAA initial eligibility process, and then wrap it up with some advising resources. So first, a background on the NCAA. Its name, long-form name is National Collegiate Athletic Association. It serves about a little over 1,000 colleges and universities. The national office is in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the membership includes, you can see the breakdown in 3 different divisions. And finally, the NCAA sponsors 24 different sports. So the NCAA Eligibility Center is going to be the hub for students' eligibility for athletic participation. If a student wants to participate in college sports during the first year of enrollment, they must register and go through normal procedures with the Eligibility Center. Eligibility Center follows NCAA bylaws that focus on academic credentials as well as amateurism credentials, and we'll go through a little bit more on those 2 subjects as we go into the presentation. Finally, as I mentioned, key is to register with the Eligibility Center. This should be done at the beginning of their sophomore year in high school. While that sounds really early, it's critical to get this information in front of the students as well as get them on the track to meeting these requirements as early as possible. And then finally, the registration fee is $75, which sounds pretty steep for some students, but keep in mind this is subject to a fee waiver that students can also receive per the ACT or the SAT. And then just some contacts for you all. As you'll note, the package or overnight delivery, as well as the Eligibility Center address, is going to be relative to sending official transcripts should you choose not to use the electronic upload function. So into the good stuff. So the initial eligibility academic requirements. Just for some background purposes, a couple of years ago, the NCAA decided to increase the initial eligibility requirements for incoming student athletes. This was done because they saw a decline in success at the collegiate level, and they wanted to ensure that our students coming into college were going to be academically prepared. So keep in mind that these requirements and these increases were relative to the following things. First, the GPA, the minimum GPA, went from a 2.0 to a 2.3 out of high school. The sliding scale, which is an index of test score and GPA, went up by about 0.5 GPA units. They added the requirement that 10 core courses must be completed before the 7th semester, which is the equivalent of senior year. And of those 10 courses, 7 must be in English, math, or natural and physical science. Again, these are the increase in requirements for a qualifier starting school August 1, 2016. So breaking down the qualifier and academic redshirt, these are two different types of academic certifications that the NCAA will certify a student on. So of the requirements on the left-hand side, you'll see high school graduate. They must have graduated from high school for both terms. The minimum GPA, though, is different. You'll see that a qualifier must earn a 2.3 and an academic redshirt must earn a 2.0. The sliding scale, as I mentioned, which is the test score and GPA, they both must meet the sliding scale. The 16 core courses, they both must meet that, and we'll go into these later in the presentation. The completion of the 10 core courses, only the qualifier who is going to be eligible for competition must complete those 10, and then subsequently 7 of the 10 is also for the qualifier. And then finally, the academic redshirt, this change, they must complete 9 semester 8 quarter hours in their first term of college in order to practice during the subsequent terms. So just some changes in the GPA points. You'll see that AR is academic redshirt and Q is qualifier. So you can see the differences, keeping in mind that the key difference between an academic redshirt and a qualifier is the ability to compete their freshman year of college. And then also in regards to the GPA, you can see the difference in the test scores and the points on this. Finally, as you saw the qualifier and academic redshirt, I wanted to go through the different certification processes and the different certification names. So a prospect is going to be enrolling in college on or after August 1, 2016, which will be the group that you all will be counseling. In order to receive tuition, athletics aid, or a scholarship and practice during their first year, freshman year of college, they must be certified as a qualifier. As you saw, those are the highest level of academic credentials that a prospect must possess. The second was the academic redshirt. This student would be eligible for athletics aid during the full year, but only practice during the first academic term. Then they must subsequently complete 9 semester hours in order to practice in the next term. And then finally, if a student doesn't meet either one of these two standards, they're going to be deemed a non-qualifier, which means they are not eligible to receive aid, practice, or competition during the first year. The academic credentials that the NCAA looks at whenever they are going through these certifications are first a test score. This can include the SAT or the ACT, and it must be under national testing conditions on a national testing date, with the exception that a state-administered ACT may be used. Second are the core courses. These are obviously administered by the high school, and they include anything from English, math, natural, physical science, social science, and then our other, which are called additional core courses. These are anything from foreign language, philosophy, some religions, etc. The core course GPA is only based on 16 core courses. It's calculated on a 4.0 scale. And then a student must graduate within 8 semesters, which is the normal 4-year route of high school. So a qualifier. This is going to be the highest level of academic certification. This student may receive aid, practice, and compete during their freshman year of collegiate enrollment. In order to be a qualifier, as deemed by the NCAA, a student must possess 16 core courses in the following areas, and you can see the breakdown there. They must have a minimum GPA of a 2.3 in those 16 core courses mentioned above. And then finally, they must graduate from high school in 8 semesters. And the added requirement, as I mentioned at the beginning in 2006, is that of a core course progression. So what this means is that 10 of the core courses, as mentioned, have to be completed before the 7th semester of high school, or the equivalent of a senior year. Of those 10 core courses that are completed, 7 of those 10 must be any combination of English, math, or natural and physical science. The key with these 10 core courses is that they become locked in for purposes of calculating the GPA. So the reason that the NCAA brought this into effect was because students were backloading all of their core courses to their senior year, and they were retaking, 5 different courses their senior year to get better grades. While by having this rule in place, it prevents you from retaking courses your senior year, because after your junior year, they become quote-unquote locked in, and you can't replace those grades that you've already earned. The sliding scale is going to look at the test score and the GPA. So the higher the test score, the lower the GPA you have to have in order to meet qualifier requirements. Academic redshirt is going to be the second level of certification, and this student is going to be eligible for athletics aid and practice during their first semester. And as we mentioned before, they can also practice their second semester if they complete 9 semester hours. So for an academic redshirt, they must present with 16 core courses in the following areas. You'll note that these are the exact same requirements that a qualifier must have. They must have a minimum GPA of a 2.0. This is lower than the qualifier's 2.3. And then finally, they must graduate from high school within 8 semesters. So for an academic redshirt, and I noted with the qualifiers, the reason that core course progression was in place was to prevent students from retaking a bunch of courses their senior year. So you'll note that the academic redshirt, they don't have to have 10 of their core courses prior to their 7th semester. So because of that, academic redshirts are allowed to retake core courses in their 7th or 8th semester to use for academic certification. Also noted, the requirements to continue practice into the second term of collegiate enrollment. The academic redshirt must complete 9 semester or 8 quarter hours at their collegiate institution in order to continue practice. The academic redshirt sliding scale is going to be on the lower end, as you saw, where the qualifiers on the higher end of achieving test score and GPA. So you'll see there the lowest GPA you can present with in those 6 core courses for an academic redshirt is a 2.0. If you have a 2.0, then you must have a corresponding 1020 SAT and then 86 ACT. And I'll explain it later, but the 86 ACT, that's going to be the cumulative score of a reading, science, math, and English in your ACT. So I know a lot of people are thinking, well, I know you can't score an 86 on your ACT. So keep that in mind, that that's the cumulative. The same for the SAT. The 1020 is cumulative of your critical reading and your math. A non-qualifier, as you'll note, if a prospect doesn't meet either the academic redshirt or the qualifier requirements, as we've previously gone over, then he or she is going to be deemed a non-qualifier. As a non-qualifier, the student cannot receive aid during their first year. They cannot practice or compete during their first year. And then finally, at a Big 12 institution, they will never be eligible for financial aid or competition without meeting these other 2 requirements. So for the Big 12 and for a couple other conferences, I know the SEC has this in place as well. What this means is that these conferences went above the NCAA's rule and said that they are going to be able to never receive aid or competition as a non-qualifier. I see one question, can they compete in a D2 or D3 during their first year? That will be subject to the D2 and D3 rules. I'm pretty sure they can. And as I mentioned here, from a two-year college, they can go to the two-year college and compete immediately as well. That could be an NAIA school or possibly a D3. So keep that in mind too. This is only for D1 FCS schools, and notably it's for the Big 12 and the SEC are two examples of those conferences that have that into play. The amateurism requirements is that all prospects, including international students, should you have any, they need to adhere to the NCAA amateurism requirements. This allows them to preserve their eligibility for intercollegiate athletics. So just as with their academic requirements and registering with the NCAA Eligibility Center, they also do their registration for their amateurism. The way this information is captured is through an online questionnaire that the student fills out and sends to the NCAA. So amateurism is preserving that of being an amateur student and student athlete. So the activities that would impact this amateurism status would be anything that relates to professionalism or acting as a professional athlete. So for example, I listed a couple. Some of the things that I want to point out would be accepting prize money above expenses, accepting benefits from an agent or a prospective agent, participating in tryouts or practices with the professional team, signing a contract, and then finally delaying full-time collegiate enrollment to play in organized sports competitions. So this would be, say you have a kid who graduates in May, he's a tennis player, he decides he wants to go 2 years and play in organized sports competitions and accept prize money. That's one thing that he cannot do for those 2 years and participate and collect money without burning seasons of competitions. I see a question, again, going back to the D2 question and eligibility if they're a non-qualifier, that's going to be dependent on the D2 and D3 rules. For a two-year college, which is usually NAIA, that non-qualifier status does not prevent them participating. So that would be a question. I'm not as well versed in the D2 or D3, but I can definitely get you guys the answer on that. I do know they have different eligibility requirements, so they would have to be recertified under a D2 requirement. So like I said, I'll get you guys that information and send it to Laura so that she can ensure you guys receive that. And then also, the latest that a student can fill out their paperwork on the amateurism as soon as possible, keeping in mind that they request, quote unquote, their amateurism, and so their questionnaire needs to be in and can begin the process starting April 1st if they're going to be enrolling in the fall, and then it's October if they're going to be enrolling in the spring. But again, they just need to have their amateurism certified prior to competing. So we've had situations where a kid enrolls, they decide they're going to walk on, and we start the entire academic and amateurism process that first week of collegiate enrollment and get it all done. So it's the sooner the better, but it's definitely before competition. I see another question on, can he participate in competition after he spends a year winning prize money? Yes, that's subject to the NCAA regulations, assuming that he hasn't already burned all 4 seasons of competition. So it's just going to be dependent on if the tennis kid, and tennis is different, is a bad example because they have an added rule of competing after they turn 21. Long story short though, yes, you're subject to a year of residence and then you can compete assuming that you haven't burned all 4 years of competition during your outside competition time. Finally, the international students, I see the question in the chat, during high school, can they be impacted? Tennis players, competing during high school doesn't require you to burn seasons of competitions. However, the amateurism requirements listed above could impact you. Say, for example, in high school, if a kid signs with a professional team or he's playing with professionals, etc., that would impact his amateurism requirements. So the earlier the better with these international students, educating them on the parameters of amateurism prior to them actually getting started in these competitions. The other question, currently enrolling seniors, juniors, affect them getting into school. NCAA does not affect collegiate admission. They're separate and apart. We never want to combine the academic side of an institution and the athletic side of an institution. So, Marcus, I think that answers your question, that they're not one and the same, but it could impact if a kid doesn't meet his eligibility requirements per NCAA. That would impact his ability to receive a scholarship. Maybe the school wouldn't offer one. And when I say the school, that being the athletics. So moving on to high school counselors' role in the initial eligibility process. So an NCAA core course. This is what I mentioned. We went through the English, math, natural, physical science, and then the quote-unquote other and social studies. So what these are courses that qualify for high school grad credit. One key thing is math must be Algebra 1 or higher. So pre-algebra, even if it counts for high school graduation, I don't think it does in Texas, but even if it does, that would not be counted as a core course for NCAA. Some examples of non-core courses, which would not receive credit by the NCAA, are going to be things like I said, intro to algebra, pre-algebra, remedial courses without an EID, newspaper, consumer finance, any type of tech prep course, and then credit by exam courses. These would not be counted as a core course. So if a student takes this, he or she would not receive credit by the NCAA in order to meet requirements. The new thing that the NCAA is seeing a lot of is duplicate core coursework. So courses on the same grade level with substitute titles. We can't have a student take American history, and this happens a lot in transfers. So let's say they take American history and then they take U.S. history at the next school. Well, these are standard, the same courses. So the NCAA would only award credit one time. And then finally, pass-fail courses. These may be used to satisfy core course requirements. However, the lowest passing grade is going to be awarded. So if the lowest passing grade for that high school is a D, then even if that student excelled in that course, they would only receive one GPA quality point because they received a quote-unquote D in the past course. I see the question in regards to credit recovery. So if the high school, this is a very nuanced question, if the high school does not designate on the transcript as being credit recovery, the NCAA technically has no reason to know that's credit recovery. So the NCAA would look at the course just like they would any other course taking at that high school. Now, if the NCAA does note the designation of credit recovery, they would have to demonstrate that this is a core course that meets all the other requirements of a quote-unquote core course that we went over in the previous slide in order to approve it. This requires extensive documentation and maybe even letters of support, etc., from the high school. So to answer the question, if it does not designate on the transcript as credit recovery, technically the NCAA has no reason to know it's credit recovery, and they would administer credit just as any other course. And if it is noted, there are some hoops you have to jump through in order to prove that this course should be treated as any other core course. So there's not a hardline rule against credit recovery at this point. Completely agree with that, and I think it should be disclosed. However, sometimes these schools have no idea, that these transcripts are being sent to the NCAA, and so it's up to the student and the counselor to be transparent in that matter. So the core curriculum time limitation, core courses, those 16 core courses must be completed no later than the high school graduation date of the prospect's graduation class. So as we mentioned in the previous slides, that 8-semester rule, this needs to be the deadline for completing all core courses as well. So say you have a kid who goes to high school, a traditional brick and mortar school for 2 years, and then he or she decides they're going to take off from school and just do online school. In order for those online courses to count as well, they would, A, need to be approved and all of that with the NCAA, but second, all of the online coursework needs to be approved whenever that student's freshman class that he or she started with graduates. So just keeping in mind, if you have a split file, meaning they're in a traditional brick and mortar and then also online, you need to pay attention to the graduation date of that brick and mortar school to ensure the prospect completes online classwork by that same date. The exception to this, if a prospect does graduate on time, meaning in the 8 semesters, they can take one additional core course for 1 full credit to satisfy the core course requirements. However, if you have a student who is taking 1 core course after graduation because they only had 15 when they graduated or what have you, they would not be able to receive athletically related aid during the time of completing that additional core course. This is just a very easy plan to follow when it comes to ensuring that the prospect meets those 16 requirements. So it's a 4x4 approach. So as you can see, for English, for math, for science courses, and for social study courses. This is an easy way to get to the 16 core courses as well as get to the 10 before senior year and then 7 of the 10 in the English, math, or science. Non-traditional courses, we see this come up a lot nowadays, and I briefly touched on it when I talked about online high schools. But these non-traditional core courses are either taught internet, distance learning, or independent study. Keeping in mind, this is not, when I say non-traditional core courses, we're not speaking to college courses. So if you have a kid who takes courses at your local community college and it's going to be counted for high school credit, this would be different than that. These are actual high school courses that are being counted. So the NCAA looks at these non-traditional core courses through a very scrutinized lens, and so it's really important to be as open and provide all the coursework and have well-documented things for a student who takes a non-traditional course. So there needs to be the following things listed under may be used, but again, just keep in mind that we need to be as open and transparent and provide as much documentation as possible in order for these non-traditional core courses to be approved. The NCAA does not approve a core course that's taken via non-traditional means if it doesn't meet the below, or if it presents with one of the below characteristics. So one thing that we see the most is it allows students to complete the course in a short amount of time. Let's say you have an online English course that a kid's going to take and they can technically finish it in 2 weeks. Well, that's not going to meet the scrutiny that the NCAA is looking for with a core course, because again, their intent with all of this is to ensure that our students are academically prepared to succeed at college. The high school core course list, this typically there's 1 or 2 people at an institution, a high school, that are responsible for this. So it's important to update the school's list of core courses every year. That way you show what new courses are offered, what courses are no longer offered. So you also want to keep the course title updated. So let's say, for example, for 2 years you named your course U.S. History. Well, you decide to change it to American History, but you don't update the NCAA core course list. So when this kid's transcript comes to the NCAA and it now says American History, the NCAA will still count it as a U.S. History even though you haven't updated your list. So again, it's important to keep that updated. Also, when you do that, ensure that you are providing the NCAA with the most accurate, truthful information on your core courses that your high school offers so that they can make an honest, accurate core course list to reflect what your high school offers. A note on weighted courses, the NCAA will award weighted credit for honors, AP type courses. However, it needs to be well documented to the NCAA that the high school does indeed award weighted grades for those courses, and the NCAA, again, will also honor that. So I spoke briefly on education impacting disabilities. The NCAA does take this into consideration for the student-athlete's well-being, and they will allow high school courses for students with education impacting disabilities to be used. What needs to happen, the high school principal submits written documentation to the NCAA showing that this student does have an EID and was allowed to take these types of courses to satisfy their academic requirements. This usually just takes the form of a letter in the written documentation. As I mentioned earlier, most students can take one core course after graduation, and the NCAA has allowed students who have an EID to take up to 3 core courses after high school graduation. And then finally, they may use test scores from a non-standard test administration. This allows for accommodations, different dates, what have you, for a student who has an EID. The test score requirements, so the time limitation on the test score, the score that must be achieved prior to registering for a minimum full-time program of studies and going to classes. So in practice, what this means is a student can graduate from high school in May or June and then retake the ACT or SAT in July before they go to school in August. And that July test would still be used in the certification. Also, students may combine their test scores. So they take the highest scores achieved on critical reading and math for the SAT, and they combine them to get the highest score possible. Same for the ACT. They take the individual subsets and they combine them. So if a student has taken the ACT 4 different times, you can technically take a subset from all 4 different times that student took the ACT to receive the highest combined test score. So just keep that in mind that they're not stuck to one ACT and one SAT. They can combine them and kind of cross them. That way they receive the best. Susie's question in the super score, technically, in practice, yes. In theory, the NCAA likes to call it something different. But technically, that's what they do on the SAT and the ACT. There were changes, as you all, I'm sure, are probably well versed in this, that College Board made to the SAT. So as you know, the result that the NCAA came to in regards to the new SAT is that an SAT score achieved on the old test may not be combined with the new test. So just keep that in mind whenever you are doing the super score or combining them. You cannot take an old SAT and a new SAT and combine those scores. Grade point averages. These are calculated using grades earned in NCAA-approved core courses. The NCAA looks at only the best grades from the required core courses. These are going to be calculated on a 4.0 scale. If on the transcript a school lists numeric grades, they're going to be changed by the NCAA to letter grades in order to award quality points. Plus and minus on grades are not considered by the NCAA. So an A minus and an A plus are both an A to the NCAA. weighted or honors or AP courses, they will be used, again, provided the high school provides the NCAA with information on the weighted grades. So if a student takes an AP course and earns an A, we all know that that's a quality point of 5. However, if that high school hasn't provided that information to the NCAA, that student will only be awarded with a 4 from the A in the AP course. So it's really critical that we work for our students and ensure that they get the most quality points that is honestly possible on their transcripts. Calculating quality points, again, I'm sure you guys are well versed on this one, but just keep in mind it's A grade, 4 points, and this is a breakdown of trimester, semester, and full year courses when calculating quality points. This is a good resource if your school operates on one of these things. So finally, we'll wrap up with some advising resources for you all and how you can help your students to ensure that they are able to receive the highest certification at the NCAA, which again is a qualifier, so that they can compete, receive aid, and practice as soon as they step on campus their freshman year. So to use as a timeline, I'll go ahead and go back to Susie's question. International students, the NCAA actually has published a international students guide to college. It's available on their website, ncaa.org, and each country actually has a different calculation for calculating GPA. So you would actually look at, and again, each country has different documents that you look at when calculating GPA. So for example, in Germany, the arbiter that's used to calculate GPA, the quality points are going to be different. The grades are going to be different. It's not your standard domestic, A is 4, etc. So if you have that, I would suggest you look at the international standards on the NCAA guide to calculate the GPA. If you have a specific country I can help you with, but generally, how is it calculated? It depends on the individual country and as it states in that guide. And I'm happy to send the guide to Laura, and she can provide it to you guys in a PDF. And if you have specific questions on how you calculate it per grade or per a different country, and it's not easily understandable based on, which I'm sure most of it isn't, on the NCAA International Guide, then we can definitely help you guys out with understanding how it's calculated per a different country. The question on, Susie, I'll definitely send that out and list some other questions on that as well. The undocumented students considered international. Marcus, can you provide some clarification on undocumented? So typically, and Susie, just to go back to your question too, when you say you work with international students, I'm assuming the coursework that was taken internationally, assuming it was taken during quote-unquote high school, that's going to be looked at differently than American courses. Anyone you have in your Texas high school, they are going to be treated like a student at the Texas high school. So if they are in classes at your high school, they receive the same transcript that every one of your students in your high school receives. The NCAA does not look into their background to determine where they were, assuming that they took freshman through senior year at your high school. So where it gets different is you have a student who transfers to you their junior year of high school, and so you know that they would have done something between their freshman and sophomore year. So if you guys transfer all those courses in, unfortunately the NCAA wants the origin of those courses. So let's say, for example, you have a student from South America transfers to you their junior year of high school. From junior year on, they take your courses in your high school. The NCAA reviews those courses they took at your high school just like they would for any kid at your high school. The courses they took their freshman and sophomore year, or the equivalent of grade 9 and 10, are going to be reviewed under those South American standards in the International Guide. So that's a standard split file case, and it requires a bifurcated system of evaluating coursework, GPA, and graduation. Those get extremely complex. There's not a bright line answer or a bright line rule for any of those, so I'm happy to assist if you have specific examples, but it's kind of difficult to give a bright line rule on those just because they do, it's a case-by-case basis. So moving on to the initial eligibility timeline, grade 9, freshman year of high school. Look at the NCAA's list of approved core courses for your high school and ensure that your students are enrolled in those courses. Their sophomore year, register them with the EC. This is $75, but this may be waived if the student has received a fee waiver for the SAT or the ACT. All you would need to do is provide that fee waiver to the NCAA, and they, again, would do this. For their junior year, they would take and submit the ACT, SAT, and use the NCAA code of 999 to ensure that it's submitted to the NCAA. Send the official high school transcript, focus on completing 10 core courses. And then finally, their senior year, they can, again, as I mentioned, take the ACT or SAT again if necessary. They would request their final amateurism through filling out the questionnaire. And then finally, they would send their official high school transcript with proof of graduation. And just noting on the questions, I'll definitely, paying attention to time, I want to ensure that I get through this for everyone. But for Susie and Marcus, definitely I will reach out to you guys and we can ensure that we have a dialogue regarding your questions to make sure that you receive the answer that you need to proceed. So transcripts, you'll send your official transcripts to the NCAA Eligibility Center after the student's junior year. So high schools now have the ability to upload the transcripts directly to the NCAA EC portal. They can use one of the following e-transcript providers, and they can literally upload it directly. What this does is it cuts down on anxiety of a transcript not arriving to the NCAA, and it also ensures that it's expedited. So if you need the NCAA to review a course for you, or you need the NCAA to review a student's academic credentials, you can do that on a more expedited basis by using one of the e-transcript providers. And then finally, email and fax transcripts will not be accepted because they are considered unofficial. College admittance, I spoke to this briefly. If a prospect meets NCAA requirements, even receives an athletic scholarship, that does not guarantee that he or she will be admitted to college. So it's a bifurcated system of NCAA requirements and then your college's standard admission requirements. And we keep those bifurcated because they're a student first and then an athlete second, and we want to ensure that the student meets the requirements for that college, and then we can tag on the NCAA requirements. Some important terms that I wanted you all to know. I'm sure you know the financial aid and the scholarship, but the IRL, or the institutional request list, this is a list of college-bound student athletes who this school is interested in recruiting. So if a student is not activated on the IRL, then the NCAA has really no means to know that this student is being recruited, so they won't even open the file for the student. So if you have a question on a student, you want to make sure that they're on an IRL and that they're activated and that schools are looking at them. That way the NCAA can keep track of them. I wanted to share this website with you guys. It's the NCAA's website that they use to promote their new or raised eligibility requirements for a qualifier. They rolled this out about a year and a half ago. It's www.2.3.org, and it includes information on pretty much anything you can imagine when it comes to doing NCAA initial eligibility. It provides shorthand answers to students and parents alike, as well as counselors. That way you all can be apprised of what's going on. They also have marketing and media material that you guys can use and that you guys can present to students who come into your offices with questions. There are a lot of brochures on there that you can print out and provide to your students. So I really encourage you all to use this resource, and also the resource of just NCAA.org. Use that as a resource to provide information. That way you guys aren't recreating the wheel when it comes to providing information to your students and even their parents on NCAA eligibility. So we have some questions that I wanted to get to, but like I said, I wanted to get through that. So go ahead if you want to and type your question. Marcus and Susie, these will be a little bit more extended answer, so I'll get with you guys separately. And just to make sure that everyone else gets their questions out. So are there any other questions that you guys have in regards to the presentation or anything in general regarding the NCAA? Of course, and you guys feel free to me an email or call if you have specific questions. I'm more than happy to be a resource for you all when it comes to these eligibility questions. You're welcome to reach out to the NCAA. They probably get a lot more questions than I do, so if you would like, a more expedited answer or what have you, something specific to a conference, please utilize my email and phone number as a resource for you guys.
All right, that looks like we are concluded. No more questions coming through the chat. Big, huge thank you to Jessica for joining us today. It seems apropos to have had an NCAA webinar on National Signing Day. Didn't realize when I was planning that this was going to be so fated for the topic and the day itself. So thank you so much for joining us, all of you who were participants. And of course, Jessica, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So with that, this webinar will be available for future viewing. If you want to go back and review any of the information, or if you have colleagues that were unable to join us, please share the information. We'll send it out over the TACAC email. And thank you all again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for listening today. I appreciate it. Response, because those are situations that we don't technically deal with a lot of at the conference level. So feel free to send me an email or anyone with specific questions and scenarios, and I can definitely get back to you guys and ensure that you receive adequate, accurate information. And if you have any other subsequent questions, we can start a dialogue to ensure that you guys receive the answer you need.